This is the Finance Committee of the School Board of Directors of Upper Dublin School District. We are here, I'm calling to order the meeting, and we have a couple of presentations. We will start with the PFM Financial Advisors presentations. Ms. Bray.
Thank you. With us this evening is Jamie Doyle from Public Financial Management, our financial advisors, and she will be talking to us about looking at debt for Sandy Run Middle School at 3 different scenarios. Actually, there's 2 parts to this presentation, as well as at the end, planning on activating or calling the financing team together and get started on issuing the next general obligation bonds. So, Jamie, please.
Good evening. It's a pleasure to be here this evening. It is hard to believe that it is time to consider your 2019 calendar year borrowing. And if you look at page 1 of my handout, I always like to start off talking about the market and interest rates. And the top portion of this chart, you can see we're currently at the blue line. The yield curve is very, very flat. So that's good news on both fronts for you. You're starting to earn more on your investments as the Federal Reserve Committee increased short-term rates. But the long-term rates at which you borrow have continued to be well below historic averages. Not quite all-time lows, but very attractive levels. If you look at the middle portion of that chart, it's the same index, just shows the historic movement. And you can see on the far right, the box that's in red, interest rates have really done nothing but decrease, go in the right direction for your borrowing since November of 2018. So that's all good news. And that bottom chart's just a blow up of that red box that I was focused on up above. So even as recently as today, you know, the market had a good day, the bond market, and we saw interest rates go down like another 5 basis points just today alone. So very, very attractive time in the market. If you look at the second page, this may look familiar, so I will go over it briefly. Again, this is your Sandy Run Middle School project, and we are anticipating borrowing somewhere between 70 and 75 million altogether as you make decisions and determinations about exactly what that number should be. Part of the flexibility of this plan is breaking it into several different pieces, so you don't have to know right this second exactly how much money you need. We will need to know that by the time it's time to do the final borrowing and the final piece of the plan. This, of course, assumes no state reimbursement. The Plan-Com moratorium is still in place, and that you may apply for grants to provide funds toward the project. In that second section, just a reminder that the IRS doesn't let us go out and borrow at these nice low tax-exempt rates just because they're low. We have to meet the reasonable expectations tests, and they are that you have reasonable expectations that you can spend 85% of the borrowed proceeds within 3 years from settlement. So the piece we're talking about tonight is just under 10 million. We're not talking about the whole amount. We're just talking about this proposed borrowing. And that within 6 months you have a substantial binding obligation to spend at least 5%. Doesn't mean you have to have spent it, just that you have the obligation. And then that you proceed with due diligence. And that last section, parameters resolutions, you've done these many times in the past. Again, it's an item of flexibility in that you pass the parameters resolution ahead of time, and that puts all the approvals in place so that, you know, we can go out into the market and lock in interest rates on the best possible day as opposed to a day when you have a board meeting that night. If you look at page 3, you'll see your existing debt portfolio. As always, the top half is gross debt service, meaning principal and interest. And the bottom half is your local share after state reimbursement is netted out to varying degrees on most of your issues. And you can see that reimbursement percentage near the bottom of the page. It's the line labeled PE percentage, or percentage of each project that's eligible for reimbursement. And as always, PFM monitors this page for refinancing opportunities, of which there are none at this particular moment in time, only because the good news and the bad news is that you have really low rates locked in your debt portfolio. If you look at the next page, we're going to look at 3 different scenarios, as Ms. Bray mentioned. The first one contemplates $70 million in borrowing. So if you look in that, I know this is a little hard to read up on the screen, but box 5, this adds up to about 70 million. It's broken into a 4-step borrowing plan. There in column 1, the first step is labeled actual because that's the borrowing that you already did during calendar year 2018. And what we're really talking about this evening is just column 2, which is labeled step 2. Again, this would be just under $10 million. And you can see down below what that might look like in column 10 in the way of debt service. And as always, I'm a little bit conservative this early on in the process. If we were having the sale today, it would look a little better than this. But that gives you an idea of what that might look like. And part of the flexibility of this plan is that based on your cash flow needs and draw schedule, we're able to break off this $10 million piece, which gets you the lowest rate possible. That's the bank qualified interest rate that you always hear me talking about, and the 5-year call feature. And again, that 5-year call feature has more value to you than ever because under federal tax reform that took effect in January of 2018, you no longer can do tax-exempt advance refundings in advance of the call date. So you want that 5-year call date. Otherwise, if you issue more than 10 million, you'll end up with an 8 to 10-year call date and have less flexibility in the future. So this is what the overall plan might look like if it turns out to be a $70 million plan. Again, we're focused on step 2, and step 2 is the same. In all 3 of these options I'm going to show you, the overall total is changing because I want to show you kind of the overall impact. But step 2 on all of these is $9,995,000 with the same structure. So if you look at page 5, same 4-step plan, same step 2, just under 10 million that we're talking about tonight. The only thing that changes a little bit is step 3. It's a little bit bigger because it contemplates an overall project of about 72.5 million. So you can see what that does in dollars to step 3 and in millage equivalent out there in column 20. And I would be remiss if I didn't say that you've done a great job in column 19 of identifying millage already in place or to be in place shortly. So even if you end up doing 72.5 million, your remaining net millage equivalent is just around $0.25 mil, and you'd have 2 years to phase that in the future. So you're very well positioned should you decide to undertake a slightly larger project. And then finally, the third scenario on page 6. Again, 4-step plan. Again, step 2 is the same size, and what changes a little bit is step 3. A little bit bigger. This is if you contemplate a $75 million overall project. You can see how step 3 gets a little bigger, and you can see what that does to the net remaining millage equivalent out there in column 20. It goes up to 0.31 mils. So just a little bit of a sensitivity study as you think about what you may or may not want to undertake. Again, step 2 in all of these is the same, so that the beauty and the flexibility of it is you don't have to decide that tonight. You just have to think about if you have the next 10 million in projects that you're ready to meet those spend down rules. The final page is a sample motion. Again, only for step 2, $9,995,000. That would authorize the finance team to go ahead and get the paperwork in order to come back to you with the debt incurring parameters resolution. You can see the sample timeline at the bottom. We're having this update and discussion this evening. The earliest that you could authorize the finance team with the above motion would be your meeting on Monday, the 25th. That would position us to come back to your voting meeting on April 29th with that parameters resolution. And then we could lock in interest rates as early as April 30th or whatever the right day is in the market. That's why it says or later afterward. And then settlement would occur at the end of May, roughly 30 days later. So I will pause there and answer any questions that you may have at this time.
So it's hard because I'm scrolling back and forth between pages, but between the 3 different scenarios, is most of the difference put on the farther out payments?
It is. The wraparound structure wraps around your existing debt portfolio. So if the project gets larger, that's exactly where we're putting that additional principal on the end in order to keep the upfront payments as low as possible and the upfront millage equivalent that's still needed as low as possible.
So I can't really tell because I have to scroll back and forth, but it doesn't go out any further. It's just larger payments toward the end on just from that one column. 2043.
It doesn't,
The-
the final
lar-
one ends 1 year later.
The largest
2043?
one, 75 million, goes out one additional year to
Okay.
2044.
Okay.
The first two both go to 2043.
So I don't know if you can answer this question or whether Mrs. Bray can answer it. How does, I mean, I know the, the millage equivalent translates, you consider 1 mil, 220,000. But if we were to incorporate that into a tax increase based on what our current millage is, how much of a difference would it make between 70 and 75? I tried a little bit to calculate, but I'm not sure if I got it. And I'm not sure that we'll need to because we may have other sources like increases in assessment or other ways to handle that if we decided to go that way.
The difference is about 1/10 of a mil, and as you mentioned, there are other things that could happen and change how you handle that. I don't know off the top of my head how 1/10 of a mil affects your average assessed value, if that's your question.
But in terms of the debt payment, it's not a huge difference. Okay.
No.
One of the points I wanted, probably should make, which I thought I was hearing at first, what the value of a mill is. It still is sitting at around 2.2 million. You've seen that before. Right now, we're higher than 2.2 million, but with some of possible potential assessment appeals, I'm being conservative as well and have told Ms. Doyle that we want to keep it right there at that amount for the time being.
Are there any other questions? Comments? No? Okay, I guess.
So what we plan to do on Monday night then is to bring forward the motion, the sample motion, well, will not be a sample, for approval of the financing team to begin the process of borrowing the money.
Right. Are we good with moving that forward? Yes. Okay. All righty. Thank you very much, Jamie.
Can
Thank
I, Vanessa, can I just
Yeah, go
chime in
ahead.
to try to answer what I think Joan's question was? Which, the question as I heard it was, so if we're looking at 0.11 mils, what would the equivalent tax increase be to cover 0.11 mils? Is that what you're asking? Yes. So recently, like our tax increase from 1718 to 1819 rose by about 0.64 mils. So 0.11 mil is a sixth.
It's a lot smaller.
Yeah, it's a lot smaller
Okay.
than the 1.99 we went up last time. It's a sixth of it, so about 1/3% on current millage. But of course, we're not talking about current millage
Right.
because it's years out. Actually, it would be less based on future millage.
That's true. Okay. Yeah, thank you.
Okay, I guess we're ready then to move on to our next presentation. Ms. Bray?
Thank you, Ms. Doyle. Our second presentation this evening will be from, it's a healthcare presentation by Christine Brown and Kristen Kotz. We've had them with us, I think now for probably 5 years. They come and they speak to us about our healthcare experience and how it relates to Upper Dublin. Last month, for the first time, we had someone come, Bob Russell, come from the consortium and really talk about our experience and everything related to that particular group. But tonight, our consultants will be speaking and focusing on the statistics related to Upper Dublin. And Mr. Sigafus is also here in the audience to listen to this tonight. Oh. Thanks. Both of our presenters tonight, I think, work exclusively, don't you, in the school K-12 market. So they specialize in helping school districts out. There are a number of districts in southeastern Pennsylvania that are the clients of Gallagher. With that, are you ready?
I am ready.
Thank you.
Good evening. My name is Kristen Kotz, and I recognize many of your faces. We've been here before, and this is Christine Brown. As Brenda mentioned, we work with a number of school districts in the area, in the Philadelphia five-county area, and often come out to present on healthcare trends for districts that are both in a consortium as well as on a standalone basis. So this evening, we're going to talk a little bit about the district's medical and prescription renewal history. We're going to talk about the medical and prescription drug trends in the school district environment as a whole. Then we're going to go through some district-specific claims and utilization. And then we're going to talk about some future considerations for negotiations and plan changes. So we'll start with the medical and renewal history, the medical and prescription drug renewal history. So this is a 5-year history, really 4-year history plus a projection of the 2019-20 plan year. It shows the district's renewal changes for medical, as well as the Bucks and Montgomery County Consortium overall renewal change, and then national trend. The 2019-20 information that is provided here is based on the district's second look renewal projections from the Bucks and Montgomery County Healthcare Consortium. So that could potentially change, but we wanted to let you know where things are at this point in time. So you can see from a medical perspective, other than this year, in the first year, the renewal increases were somewhat on the higher side. But this year, it looks like we're getting a favorable increase for the 19-20 plan year. When we take a look at the prescription drug renewal history, that has run fairly well. This year, we're expecting a low increase as well, which is nice to see. And for the most part, the district has been below trend. We're going to get into some of the actual claims and utilization to show you what is driving trend and really what's going on with prescription. I'm sure you can remember from years past that we often talk about specialty drugs, and we're going to be continuing to talk about that today.
Fortunately, that topic is not going away.
Yes. So some of the factors that impact trend from an overall perspective, not just specific to the district, but each year we apply a trend factor when we're doing a renewal projection. So this is the cost of care if your claims remained exactly the same, claims and utilization remained exactly the same. The cost would still increase because of other things that are going on in the market. So for example, at this point in time, we're seeing a lot of provider mergers as well as physician consolidation and employment. So what does that mean? That can be a really good thing in some respects, but it's creating big, larger companies, kind of the Comcast of healthcare, and therefore at times the pricing can increase as a result of that. The convenience of care is another great thing. The urgent care clinics and those types of things are popping up everywhere, which is great, but they do come at a cost. There are some other more activity that we're seeing is new outpatient centers that are being built, and next to the outpatient centers, hotels are actually being built because it's less expensive to go and recover in a hotel if you don't need round-the-clock care. So that's kind of the next phase of healthcare that we're seeing. But as these projects go up, it's a huge investment and impacts everyone. There's also governmental funding shifts, medical innovation and technology. The new medical innovation is changing rapidly, quicker than anything we've ever seen before. There are amazing things that can be done now, but again, they come at a huge cost. And of
Really, a good example of that is, sorry, a good example of that is premature babies being born. 10 years ago, you wouldn't see a child that is born at 24 weeks gestation survive. And now we're seeing, them be able to be cared for and appropriate treatment be given and really supporting their life.
And of course, the drug spending growth, which we'll get into more detail about that. As Christine mentioned, the premature babies, that's something that we're seeing across our book of business. We are seeing more and more million-dollar claimants and multi-million-dollar claimants. So whether you're a small district or a large district, we're seeing the claims, the high claimants not only increase in the quantity, but increase in the actual dollar amount. And one of the reasons is because of new technology. So we often see, if I had to guess as to what high claimant would be, that would be $1 million that we would see. One of my guesses would be a premature baby, because that is what happened. Cancer treatments are becoming more costly as well, but the survival rate has improved. So again, unfortunately, these things come at a cost. One of the other things is years ago, the healthcare reform, or ACA, made plans unlimited. So years ago, you would see $1 million cap on the plans. And that didn't mean that members stopped receiving treatment at $1 million. It just really changed the way the hospitals billed. So we have one district that experienced a $7 million claim in 1 year. And of course, they have insurance stop loss protection to cover that, but the funds have to come from somewhere, so their stop loss costs increased substantially that following year. And then we move on to prescription drug trends, and I apologize for talking so much about specialty, but they really are continuing to create specialty drugs, which in some ways are wonderful because there's now a cure for hepatitis, there's cures for cancer, and again, the survival rate and the lifespan for members is greatly increasing. However, in some cases, some of these specialty costly drugs are just expanding indications and being treated for conditions that are not life-threatening. One of the new ones is eczema. So you may even have seen on TV a commercial for Dupixent, and that's a specialty eczema treatment that costs a couple $1,000s a month. So specialties used to be described as very high-costing medications for a small number of conditions, and now they can even be, specialty drugs can even be used for cholesterol. And previously, specialty drugs were typically only injectables, and now they're even in pill format. So the pharmaceutical companies are continuing to just create these specialty drugs. One thing that we've been seeing in this school district environment is a move towards more consumerism in the plans. We know it's very challenging to get there in the public sector, but we are seeing more districts that have some type of deductible program in place. And even those districts that don't necessarily have a deductible program in place have more of a consumer type approach, where maybe the cost of care is less expensive. Let's say if you're getting lab work done at a hospital setting, that's more expensive than getting lab work done in an outpatient setting. So we're starting to see more consumerism in the school district environment and believe that we're going to go down that road in the future. This slide just shows, according to Benefit Focus, which is a Ben administration system, about 50% in 2018 of their school district book of business have moved to offering at least one consumer-driven type of plan. And in the private sector, this is very, very typical, but in the public sector, not so much. And of course, the consumer-driven plans that are offered in the public sector in this area are still very rich consumer-driven plans, but at least they are getting members thinking a little bit about where they're going for their health care and encouraging employees to become a little bit better educated about the cost of services. The other thing that we have been talking a lot about with our clients is the opioid epidemic. And I'm sure that no one here is immune to knowing someone, unfortunately, that has been impacted by this epidemic. But what we are finding is that from a high claimant perspective, we're seeing on almost all of our clients, we're seeing at least one or two individuals that have a high claimant as a result of this epidemic. So there are things that can be done to try and combat what's going on. So we did include a slide here that illustrates the cost of substance abuse on your workforce. This is just an organization with about 1,000 employees, and there was a study done that shows that of lost time, job turnover, and healthcare costs, the cost was $860,000. So we don't feel as any districts, unfortunately, are immune to this. And that is why we recommend either the pharmacy benefit manager or the Center for Disease Control's prescribing guidelines for opioids. And the pharmacy benefit managers have all gotten on board with this and put in programs. And it's not where members cannot get their pain medicine if they need it, but it's really putting an authorization on those prescriptions to ensure that it's meant for that member. And then in addition to that, limiting the prescriptions to 5 or 7 days, depending upon the condition, to ensure that a member that maybe went for dental surgery is not getting 30 pills when they may only need 3 or 4 pills. And unfortunately, that's what was done in the past, which has potentially gotten us to the point where we're at. We've also recommended some district policies, and one of the biggest things is really the employee assistance program and making sure that employees know that, trying to remove that stigma and making sure that employees know where they can go for help. Now we're switching gears a little bit and just talking about district-specific claims and utilization. Before I jump to that, does anyone have any questions on anything we went over thus far? Okay.
I actually do have a question.
Sure.
But this actually might be more of a question for Brenda, I'm not sure. But you mentioned early on in the first 2 slides that those figures were based on our second look, and I don't remember hearing our second. Did I miss a meeting? Did we discuss our second look so far?
I believe we just got the second look.
Okay.
Yeah.
So those numbers, 3.32 and 4.38%, are our second look numbers?
Yes,
Okay.
sorry. They had to be modified a little bit because of some events in the consortium. So that's another reason why they weren't, they haven't been published until tonight.
Okay. That's fine. Just wanted to make sure I understood.
Yeah,
Thank you.
that was something just received. Yes.
Oh, I was going to say, Joan, go ahead.
On this, I guess these early slides, you show Upper Dublin, Bucksmont, and National Trend. I guess my question is, since you work with school districts around the region and probably some of the other consortia, can you tell, do you have a rough idea of how Bucksmont compares to other consortia around the region?
Well, so I know that the Bucksmont is going through some changes, which I think we just need to continue to monitor the changes that are happening. But thus far, it has not impacted the district negatively as in the last year's renewal and then this year. So I would say, for your prescription drug to be at a little over 4%, and your medical at 3% is very, very good. This past year, many of our districts have experienced positive claims. I know that some of the carriers are getting better at negotiating their contracts with the hospitals. Contracts are now being based on quality instead of quantity. So I do believe that that has a positive impact all around. But from an overall perspective, the last 2 years are running, I would say, below norm. So again, we'll continue to monitor what's going on in the consortium to ensure that it continues to be a positive impact for the district.
One quick question to Ms. Bray or maybe Mr. Sigafus. Because I'm not familiar with it, have we added a consumer-driven plan to our group of plans that we have?
No,
Right.
and so I apologize for interjecting, but the Bucksmont currently just they don't offer a
They don't,
consumer-driven
okay.
plan. And again, although districts are moving in that direction, they're just starting to. So it's something that probably should be considered in the future. And I'm sure that the consortiums are going to start to look to offer those types of programs. I do think that their one offering that is now offered has a little bit more consumerism than the
Right,
other
I
plans.
thought maybe that was the
Yeah,
case.
there is a deductible,
Yes.
but
Right.
that doesn't necessarily go all the way.
Right.
Yeah.
But it's very different than the straight co-payment plans that members were used to years ago. Even a deductible introduces a little bit more consumerism for the member.
Right, okay, thank you.
Now we just have to have people sign up.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. Thank you.
And we recognize that's definitely a challenge. And it's a long process to get there for districts too, because members are very nervous about going into those types of programs. I think it's something that's going to happen in the future, that we're going to see the majority of districts over the next couple of years offering a consumer-driven plan as an option. So the first slide on utilization, we compare the plan year 2017-18 to the plan year 2016-17. And from an overall perspective, plans run very well. The total medical net payment is increased by about a little over 2%. So from year to year, that increase is below trend. So that's great to see. Most services have decreased in both cost and utilization, with the exception of outpatient costs. Outpatient costs, we have seen a rise on that in general because more services are moving from inpatient to outpatient, which is a good thing overall because the cost is less in an outpatient environment. So if it can be done, that is a good thing. The only thing that would be somewhat of a red flag is the emergency room increase. We do see the emergency room a little bit higher in the school district environment. There are some employees that just continue to go to the emergency room, even though there are other options out there. But we still want to continue the education on the urgent care, retail clinics, and those types of things, because an emergency room visit is approximately $1,000 from a claim perspective, where urgent care is approximately $200 to $300. So it can save the plan a lot of money if members try that avenue. The next slide goes through just plan year to date, so July 1st, 2018 through January 31st, 2019, so you can see how the plan is running. And for comparison purposes, we did compare it to the same time frame the prior year. As I'm sure you're aware, the membership really hasn't changed that much. There was a little bit of a decrease in membership, but the plan is running very, very well, plan year to date. So we're seeing a decrease compared to last year of about 14%. And most of the services have decreased in both cost and utilization, again, with the exception of outpatient surgery and inpatient admissions. So the inpatient has increased as far as the number of members going, but the actual cost of the inpatient has decreased. So more people that are going into the hospital, but with less severe conditions overall. And then finally, for medical claims and utilization, we took a look at the plan year to date, the medical payment on a per member per month basis. Again, that has decreased by about 7%. And we took a look here at what was driving the decrease. So you can see that the orange portion of the medical per member per month is outpatient payment, and the blue portion is inpatient. and both have decreased, but the outpatient payment has decreased by over 18%. So it's a good news story for the plan thus far, and of course, your renewal projections are reflecting that. We do always take a look at high claimants. So plan year to date, there are 8 high claimants above 50,000. However, there are none above 100,000, which is great news. And honestly, it's something that we have not seen that often. So this is not very typical. We are very used to seeing very high claimants, even though it's only a portion of the plan year. And for comparison purposes, we have another district and they already have, it's about a similar size, they already have $1 million claimant for the same time frame. And then their next claimant is about 700,000. So again, you have protection to cover you above these thresholds, but when there are costs above them, it's, you kind of pay for it in the long term.
Something I noticed about some of the claims for this year, several seem to be orthopedic in nature, and I'm wondering, as our workforce ages and people are staying at work longer, is there some talk out there in the marketplace about addressing these orthopedic needs from a provider standpoint, or, I just kind of thought that was interesting.
Yeah, we actually are seeing this on a lot of districts because of the aging workforce. I don't think that the carriers are doing that much about it, but that doesn't mean that it's not something that we can focus on from an overall perspective for wellness and well-being. And oftentimes we have districts that do take a look at this activity and then determine that it's best if they put something in place directly as a result of that.
Kristen mentioned in a previous slide medical technology. I am speaking from a personal perspective, but I know 10 years ago, a hip replacement, you were in the hospital as an inpatient for 5 days. My mother-in-law just had a hip replacement and she was out the very next day. So I think more people are now electing to have these types of procedures done because they are much more efficient, but efficiency comes with a cost as well.
Yeah, so another district that is seeing this, we're seeing a larger quantity, but less cost for each of them, but it has increased their claims a little bit because we are seeing a larger quantity in this. So that speaks to what Christine mentioned, is that the technology is improved, so more members are getting them, and they could be less costly than if you were to go to inpatient to the hospital, but now more people are addressing this. So but we certainly will look into if there are ever any programs that we do see that are specific to this. We will make sure that the district has that information. And then when we take a look at just the overall claims, so this year, the cost of claimants above 50,000 are only 17% of your overall cost, where last year there was 23%. So that's a good news story as well, and we can see that in your overall claim activity. Before we move on to the prescription drug utilization, are there any questions about the medical? Okay, we'll move on. So for the prescription drug, we took a look at the 16-17 plan year versus the 17-18 so that you can see where you ended up last year. And there was about a 5% increase in prescription drug claims. And that is really, again, below trend. Unfortunately, we are seeing very large increases in prescription drugs, and one individual can change the entire population's cost. What we like to do is take a look at the specialty cost as a percentage of the overall cost. So last year, the 2016-17 year, specialty was about 36% of the overall cost, and it has increased to about 43%. The reason why that is so shocking is because you can take a look at the number of utilizers at the bottom. So in 16-17, there were 22 specialty utilizers that cost the plan $723,000. This year, there are 29 utilizers that cost the plan about $916,000. This is not outside the norm of what we see, so it's this is very common, but 29 individuals right now are really accounting for almost half of the prescription drug claim spend. We also put on here what the specialty percentage member cost share is. So as these costs continue to rise, if the co-payments that they're paying remain the same, then that percentage is going to continue to get lower. So they're paying 0.5% of the overall cost of the medication. We are now starting to see districts react to the specialty drugs and put certain programs in place that we're going to talk about in a couple minutes. So when we look at your plan year to date, we were able to obtain claims through February for the prescription, and the plan is running well, so that's good news. It actually decreased by about 1%. So the specialty has driven in both scenarios really the cost. So the specialty, there is one less utilizer, and the specialty costs have actually decreased by about 9% compared to the same time last year. They account for about 41% of the costs, but we're going in the right direction. Where every other client we're seeing, we're going this way with that. So that is a positive thing, although it is still shocking to see that 25 members are costing about 41% of the overall prescription drug costs. And then we take a look just at the top specialty drugs. Many of them are MS drugs. These are actually, I apologize, these are the top 10 prescription drugs by plan cost. So 9 of the 10 of them are specialty. And that is sometimes 10 of the 10 are specialty. That is pretty normal. And, we typically see a lot of the conditions on here as under the top drug. Unfortunately, a lot of these conditions are ongoing. If you have MS, you're going to be on that medication for your lifetime. But so 12 utilizers are costing about $500,000 annually. Oh, not annually, I apologize, July through February. When we take a look at some of these drugs, although, again, Humira is an example you may have seen on TV that is now treating psoriasis. So, one of the things that we're going to discuss are some programs that kind of prevent a member from getting an expensive drug as the first line for conditions like psoriasis as opposed to, a life-threatening illness. Now we're on to the future considerations for negotiation purposes. But one of the things that we have talked about with a lot of school districts are the utilization management programs and implementing the prior authorization, step therapy, and drug quantity limits. This is something that we recommend at negotiations. Some unions often have a hard time understanding it, but more districts are now moving down this road because prescription drug has really changed. So years ago, it was very simple to get a prescription from your doctor and to just go and get it filled, pay your copayment, and be on your way. Now certain services are being moved from the medical to the pharmacy, and cancer is a good example of that, where it's a great thing. Someone can go and get a cancer medication and potentially take it at home. For years ago, we would only see that treatment really done in an inpatient facility. But at these prescriptions are very, very costly. And so a prior authorization is something very similar to the authorization on the medical side for an MRI. And it's done behind the scenes, but this is something that we recommend. These programs typically have to be negotiated with the union because they perceive it as a change in their benefits. The drug quantity limits, this aligns dispensing quantity with FDA guidelines. And this really is for certain medications. I think I've brought this up before, but migraine is a good example. If you have a migraine treatment and you need to take the medicine when you're not feeling well, you don't need 30 pills for 30 days. You really only need 8 or 9 pills for the month, because if you're getting migraines every day and taking that pill every day, then there's a more serious situation. And oftentimes, you can go to different types of doctors, and there's so many different medications out there that you may say, well, the doctor knows what they're dispensing, but they're not always specialists on every single particular drug, which is why we do think it is important to put these types of protections in place. Step therapy is a little bit more challenging for employees, because what step therapy does is it encourages members to try a lower costing alternative first. Again, we have several districts that have implemented it, but it has taken a little while for them to get these programs in place, because the prescription drug landscape has really changed, and they're very used to how things were previously done. The other thing we're starting to see in the school district environment is a designated specialty tier. This can be a little bit challenging, but if you think about a medicine that costs a couple $1,000s a month, a member may only be paying $30 for it or $50 for it, and that particular medicine costs thousands of dollars, and they may not have any idea of that. They may not really even care, because they're just getting their medicine, but maybe if they had to pay a percentage of the cost of the medicine, or a higher copayment, they may think if there are some alternative. The challenge with this is finding an appropriate copayment price where members that need to take their specialty medication are able to afford it, but you're still making members think, do I need to get that Dupixent for eczema, or can I try something else first? We're starting to see formulary strategies. So what the pharmacy benefit managers do is they have a preferred formulary list, and they actually exclude certain medications. It does become a challenge for some members, because they could be on a medicine that is excluded, but the pharmacy benefit manager works with the pharmaceutical company and says, we will solely distribute this on this formulary. Can you give us a better price? And the difference is typically between a Humalog and Novolog. So Humalog may be on one formulary, but not on another. We're starting to see districts move towards the formulary route where they are excluding medications. Whenever you implement any of these things on the prescription drug side, it takes time, because we always recommend meetings with the employees as well as advance notice. So the pharmacy benefit managers do send out notices to both the members as well as their providers, and give them adequate time to change their medication. There is also an exception process under these programs, because there are times when members can't take the alternative. So there is an exception process, and as long as it's clinically appropriate and clinically necessary, members are able to get approved. So once we speak to that point to the unions, they usually are okay with making this change. We're also starting to see more movement towards high performance networks in both the medical and the pharmacy landscape. This, I would say, is less popular compared to the others, but down the road, I think that that's something that's coming to the school district environment, but really focusing on the pharmacies and the doctors that are providing high quality and cost effective services for their patients. Another thing that we're starting to see in the public sector is the value-based benefits. And so this is really making sure members are continuing to take their medication, and maybe offering some type of incentive for them to take their ongoing diabetes medication. This goes over much easier with the unions than some of the other things, because it's that carrot approach as opposed to the stick. And then finally, the spousal surcharge or exclusion program. This has not gotten a ton of traction in the school district environment. The unions definitely do not like this more than anything at all, but I will say that on what we're seeing, I think that this is the direction that school districts are going to have to go in the future, because as the school district's benefits continue to kind of remain as generous as they always were, and the private sector benefits are kind of getting worse and worse, really all the districts are carrying the entire family on their plan. And at some point in time, we're going to have to come up with a way to continue to offer affordable benefits to the employees. And it may be if you have access to other health care, you have to take it. The challenging thing is if you do a spousal surcharge and you do end up getting that approved between you and the union, the cost of the surcharge needs to be a pretty high dollar amount to get any movement. So that's really been the challenge thus far, is it's not worth to negotiate just $50 or $100 a month for a surcharge because the members will end up just paying that. And the real purpose of this is to get some of the spouses off the plan. And the last slide is just a thank you. So at this point in time, I know that you had asked questions in the interim, but please feel free to ask any questions that you may have at this point in time.
Just one about the some of the specialty drugs that have multiple indications. You had talked about approaching some of those folks about potentially switching to a less cost alternative. Are you given the information about which of the diagnoses that they're being treated for, or are we not?
No, we don't always know that. So what is shown on here really is what the indications are for that particular medicine. In most cases, it's probably not off-label use.
That's what I was going to ask.
But what is happening with all the specialty medications is they started out with just treating this, and then as they find out it does other things, they're expanding, but there could be alternative treatments that are less expensive. And psoriasis is what I would say the perfect example of that, because now it's really being pushed for medicines that used to be just treating rheumatoid arthritis. And now those medicines are treating psoriasis, and potentially members have not tried anything else that's less costly first.
This may be more a question for Ms. Bray or Mr. Segelfus, but you mentioned that the ER visits, there may require some education, that $1,000 versus the $200, $300 could be good. Is there something that is in the works? Are we doing this? Are we educating our staff to encouraging them to go for the lower cost?
Just to add on that, is there a more significant copay for going to emergency rooms? Okay.
I can tell you. Oh, sorry.
Oh, I was going to say, one of the things that the consortium has done is, and we were able to do this because we were part of the Bucksmont consortium, we can change the plan for the employees that are involved without having to go to the negotiations table. So one of the things that we did put in place is, for example, a smaller copay if an employee goes to an urgent care center. So right now it's like $28, and up the cost if they go to an emergency room. It's $100. It was a first step. I think we might need to take a second step to really show the difference. In addition to that, we've just introduced as well as teledoc, telemedicine, which is really no expense. So we don't want somebody going to, the ER if, they have a bad case of poison ivy or a bad rash or pink eye or something to that effect. They can go right online or on the telephone, talk to a doctor, get the medication that they need, and completely cut out the ER visit. So those kinds of initiatives are things that we're looking at.
So when did we change the copays for emergency rooms, and are these results after a significant amount of time with the higher copay?
I think it's been about a year or two. Sometime, but I think it's still progressing.
So we are seeing a slight improvement plan year to date, but what we can do is we can track that. We do have some clients that have introduced the telemedicine, and they're trying to reduce the co-payments for the urgent care and those types of things. So we've tracked it on a monthly basis, and we can do the same thing. Sometimes it's just challenging. Unfortunately, we see the same peaks in the same time frames, even with introducing some of this stuff. So I think it's just going to take some time and more communication and awareness to members. But some people just they do not like change.
Are there any other comments or questions? Thank you very much for the information.
Thank you
Appreciate
so much
it.
for your
Thank you.
time and for listening.
As we move on the agenda here, Ms. Bray, do we have any announcements?
Not this evening?
We don't. Okay. We do have February 21st minutes. If anyone has any comments or questions, please let Brooke know about that. We'll just get right on to the recommendations for the legislative meeting, treasurer's reports.
Again, due to the change in the date of our legislative meetings, you have before you the food service fund for January, as well as the general fund for February, and only the high school needed to report their student activity fund for the month as well. Any questions?
These will be on Monday's agenda.
Yes, of course, we will move those forward.
Okay. Are we good with that? All right. We're going on then to item B with the agreement with Lukens and Wolf.
Yes, 200 Dryden Road is a property that we've had assessments on in the past. One was filed last year, and although the proposal that you see before you was dated in June 25th, it's only now that we're starting to work on this and have some conversation. It's time for Mr. Lukens to give us do some very basic appraisal work. So we'll take this to Monday's meeting and start working on Dryden Road.
We'll move this forward then, if that's okay. Any questions on it? No? Okay. Our next item here is the CIT Chromebooks lease.
Yes, we're, I think, in the third year, and before you are fourth.
Hey, Phil, we need you to
Yeah,
come
you
to the
have,
mic.
you need. I just noticed, I thought out of the right eye that you were
Yep.
giving me a hand
Um,
gesture.
That's why I stopped by.
Yeah.
We're in the fourth year currently of our big bubble, and then we have these two intermittent small onboarding of refreshing for one grade and onboarding of fifth graders, with the domino now of our graduating senior devices going down to lower element, right? So now we have this cycle. So this is that small bubble entering its fourth year.
And there's really an Intel chip shortage.
Globally, there's an Intel chip shortage. Intel has switched where it's putting its emphasis, and it's impacting devices everywhere. It's going to impact device availability. Manufacturers are gearing up to, find other chip manufacturers, partners. But during this transition time, there's a real shortage. So we're lucky that we can lock in this pricing now, because two things will happen. Pricing is anticipated to go up with summer purchasing, and supply is going to evaporate quickly. So school districts have been warned that, especially if you're doing a big order, right, you might not have it for September if you are ordering in June and July.
Wow.
So this is an opportunity for us to just lock this
Get in the door.
and not worry.
Okay. Any other comments or questions on this? We'll move this forward then. Also, thank you very much.
Just one point that needs to be noted, the solicitor has not had a chance to review and sign off on everything. And in addition to that, because we're borrowing another close to $10 million, the lease will be impacted as it was last year, because we want as much bank qualified debt as what we can purchase.
So will we see this on Monday or no?
I think we'll see it on Monday, but we will still have the subject to clause at the end of it.
Okay. Okay.
We've done this now several times. I'm not expecting any major changes. Last year was also in a
Right.
bank qualified loan situation.
Right. Okay.
And we copied and pasted and just changed the dates on those and the numbers on those documents. Right?
Okay.
So, yeah.
Good. All right. Now we're on the E+ firewall and wireless proposal.
Go ahead.
So this was a topic that we discussed back when we did budget presentation. Currently, we receive a gigabyte of bandwidth from the IU as our internet service provider,
Right.
and we want to dial above that But to do that, we have to invest in our backbone, and we've invested in our backbone infrastructure, and this is really that last piece. This is the piece that interfaces with the Sunesis pipeline. And so to be able to, and we want to, you go up in these big increments, right? So right now we have a 1 gigabyte pipe. Next set is a 10 gig, and we won't purchase 10 gigs worth, but we can't go above. And we do hit our ceiling regularly in terms of internet bandwidth use. So this is that last piece of investment. And it's also the last year that we can leverage Category 2 E-rate. We don't know the status of E-rate funding. That's up to federal government, current administration, and whether it continues to invest in subsidizing access for schools and libraries to the internet. But we have money left, and we don't want to leave money sitting on the table. So it's an opportunity for us to do that. We had one, we did a PEPA mini bid, so RFP, and we only had one company come forward.
Wow. Okay.
We were very, very specific about what we wanted.
Okay. Narrowed the.
Yeah, and we did our research, and it was very specific.
Are there any questions or comments on this? I guess then we'll move that forward as well. Thank you very much.
Very quickly, what's the timing?
Oh, what's the timing on installation?
Yeah.
So well, here's this very quick turnaround. So we will file this for E-rate on Tuesday after Monday's approval, because the end of the month is the deadline. So we'll do that filing, or whatever date. Next Wednesday is the deadline. We will file, and then I'd like to have this work done right after school lets out, ideally before summer school starts. We have enough big projects over the summer,
Yeah.
including a new student information system. So
Right.
this is one to just knock out early. And then when people are using the internet all through the summer, and it's just a few people, we find out where all the problems are, and it's okay. It's not really impacting instruction.
Try it out. Okay. Thank you very
Thank
much.
you.
We'll move that forward.
We have in that also, tangential to that is a wireless install from an upgrade and refresh. But that's just sort of low-key work that's happening. So
That's not part of.
it's part of it. It's all bundled into this
okay.
one big E-rate ask.
Gotcha. Okay.
And something to note there, that we originally we had a plan where we would upgrade half of the old devices in Fort, and then we were going to do all of Fort Washington, retire the very old devices, take the not so old devices, bring them over to one of the other elementaries, and do this staggered domino. We won't be able to do that. E-rate is, there's a certain amount of money allocated to each school. So we will be distributing these across 3 elementaries. And it's all the wash in the end. For us, it's just a little bit more of spreadsheet work, tracking, what classroom is what age in terms of its access point.
Wow.
But not that deal.
Okay. Thank you for that.
Thank you.
We're on to our next item, residential assessment settlement agreement.
Certainly compared to what we were just discussing, this is a minor dollar amount. However, it has involved attorneys, and the board needs to approve this small residential appeal. That will be on Monday, if you please.
Do we have any comments or questions on this? No? We can move this forward? Yes. Okay. We shall move that forward for next week. Now comes up our favorite lease renewal option for 275 New Jersey Drive.
Yes,
Back.
and much as what Phil was discussing, this will be on Monday night's agenda, and it will need to be signed and sent on Tuesday and delivered. This is the last, it's the second amendment, but it's the last under the current lease and agreement that on 275 New Jersey. I've attached a little bit another, in addition to just the letter exercising the second renewal option. The previous amendment is attached to give you some history on it.
Right.
We've been renting this particular location since 2008, so there are predecessor leases and documents. Lastly, if you were to read through it, you will note that the increase this time is based on CPI notice. I've enclosed the most recent CPI notice, but I'm sure we will have a conversation about exactly which CPI notice we will be using. That's why I didn't go ahead and do the calculation at this point.
Okay.
But that gives you an idea of 1.25.
So once this year is up, then a new lease needs to be,
This will extend for 2 years
2 years.
instead of
It's-
just one.
Gotcha.
So this will take us through June 30th of 2021.
okay. But after that, then should we still be at that location, we would need a whole new lease
Correct.
negotiation.
And I certainly wouldn't suggest that we wait too terribly long.
Right, okay. So are there any questions on this? No? Okay, we'll move this forward then also. Thank you. And now we're up to expenditure budget, part 2.
So tonight's list of functions that we'll be taking a look at is much shorter than last month's, but this is where the majority of the money is within our budget. Function 1100 and then 1200, which is where we do most of our work as far as educating our students. Everyone can take a look and move through the particular information. There's quite a bit of additional information on the info pages. But please note on the summary page as to the total amounts. In function 1100, we're increasing from about 43.8 million to approximately 46 million. The reason why I want to take just a brief look at this page is to note that we also have basic ed funding and some ready-to-learn grants and supposedly some offsetting revenue or revenue from the state that helps us run these programs. But as you can quickly note, between basic ed, ready-to-learn, and the title funds within the function 1100, it's only about 3.4 million compared to almost $46 million. The real information that's helpful is, I think, within the detail as we have it. And note that in 1100 we have 5.6 curriculum coordinators that their salaries are included here, as well as 0.6 FTE for Robbins Park. And then we have the professional staff of 256.8 FTE regular ed teachers. Each one of those amounts includes the actual salary according to the bargaining unit, and also under the 121 and the 26 million or 26.6 million for next year, it includes the non-teaching duties such as mentoring and bus duty. Salary expense is also in there for long-term subs. Support staff, we also have a number of aides, 31.1 FTE, educational assistant, office, cafeteria, and playground aides. And since we have budgets that CBAs that are approved, those amounts, again, with our software, we're able to roll forward what the costs will be. Fringe benefits is a very large number from dental assurance. Notice this going through this process also gives Ms. Baldessano and me a chance to look at our budget numbers from the previous year. Just looking at dental, we under budgeted for the current year, but have made the correction based on the projection for this year. Obviously, we talk about our fringe benefits for PEASers, which is the largest expense, and it's based on the salary amount. It's increased, as we talked about last month, from 33.43% to 34.29%. while it certainly is a significant amount, it is not quite the peaks that we've had in previous years.
Is this just the 50% just the district's cost, or is this the full cost
This
that
is
we get?
This is the full cost.
So is it shown somewhere else, offsetting, or it's
No.
not on this? It's not on this page. It's in the revenue.
Yeah,
Okay.
it's in the revenues for those two particular items. Object 300 is the purchase professional services, which is primarily the contracted services for substitute teachers and aides. We went to kind of outsourcing that to a third party a number of years ago, and you'll notice that those amounts are actually down a little bit for next year, as they are as well as what we anticipate for this year's budget. Equipment repairs and copier expenses are very much geared to the contract, not much variance within those. Postage for school mailings, tuition for regular ed students, and charter school students, printing and travel reimbursement are included in the 500 object. You'll note that, and we did have a lot of conversation with Mrs. Clegg about charter schools, particularly in special ed. And we did have an increase last year in both regular ed and special ed, but we're not seeing quite as much of an increase as what we had anticipated. So the current year estimate is down a bit, and we've kind of taken that into consideration for next year. But students can be added at any time. Supplies, cost of supplies, the books, 600 functions, software used in classrooms. We made an adjusting entries made for the Chromebook lease proceeds. The revenue is posted for this as well. So the net effect to both revenue and expenditure is zero. But just wanted to mention also that for next year, the budget amount you will see is decreased from $889,000 to $812,000, and one of the major reasons for that has to do with building budgets being based on a per pupil allocation, and we determine that amount by the projected enrollment. So next year the amounts are decreasing. Dues and fees, cost of membership dues, fees, PSAT and AP fees remains pretty constant.
Question?
Yes, sir.
Under equipment, for this year, we budgeted 15, we paid 138, or we anticipate paying 138. Is that desks and chairs? Is that what the desks and chairs note is about, or is the desks and chairs note the difference between 15 and 21?
Actually, this year, we went out and purchased a lot of equipment, desk and chairs for the elementary schools in particular. We had not been purchasing furniture for a number of years, so we did, I believe, three classrooms in each of the elementary, as well as high school.
And how did it come about that we spent over $100,000 that we didn't budget on that?
Because it came up, it was an initiative at the end of the year, and so we'll need to have budgetary transfers to address the particular cost in this area. Remember, we always charge things where they should properly be charged. What we'll be doing is taking from other areas of the budget where we're not spending the money. Good question.
So this isn't an ongoing thing. There won't be a similar charge next year.
We're not planning on
Okay.
it. Any other questions?
Just a comment, because I walked out of one of your budget presentations earlier. I'm actually going to walk out on this one as well in a few minutes. So it's not because of something you said.
I know. I remember the last one, and the reason was to go to another meeting, which was very important. But thank you. Moving on to the 1200 function. Special education. Again, a lot of information is available as you read about special education and all the particular areas that we provide services and education for students with various needs in our school district. And that the programs are provided in accordance with state and federal requirements and up through the age of 21 if necessary. I didn't go into detail on the salaries, but I will do so here because it's a smaller total amount for a special education, smaller number of teachers, which we'll get to very shortly. But again, with software, Ms. Baldessano and Ms. Fredrickson are able to really track individual teachers. And special ed alone, there were 4 teachers that had substantial, or what I'll call substantial. They had several column movement, and it became effective for, we didn't know about it until September after the budget had been passed for the current year, and you'll see this when we go into the detail even more. So you'll note that our cost for budgeted versus estimated is a little bit higher than what we had initially budgeted. So we had some increases with teachers moving columns, and so that is taken into consideration for next year as well, obviously, once they make that column movement. Again, just because of the way the contract written, and it's very similar for other school districts, you typically don't know when people make the column movement until September after the budget has been passed. So I'll comment on that. And we also had, I believe, 9 or 10 teachers in regular ed that also made that change. Special education, like regular education, we have some revenue streams. IDEA, there's also some tuition from other LEAs that we can apply, if you will. It used to be that you'll notice, and you may be wondering, if you're a member of the public, why it was $591,000 tuition from other LEAs. Just remind you that's back when we had Villa and a number of special education students from there, and now we're down to only $10,000. But access to Title 19 is about $130,000. We hope that we hit that amount. Notice in 2016-17 it was over $200,000. But these are amounts of sources of revenue to help fund the cost. But once again, it's $2.5 million, and the cost is close to $14 million. Detail. 2 special education supervisors, and you might look at those numbers and say, why would they decrease that much? We had a change in one of our special education supervisors, and that individual left us, and then we weren't able to have a replacement come and join us. We hired someone certainly sooner than that, but the district chose to hold them for 60 days. So for the current year, we haven't had quite a full year. We'll not have a full year of expense in that particular area. And then next year, we'll continue to receive the benefit because the replacement individual has a lower salary than the individual who left us. So under professional staff, we have 2 behavioral specialists, 3.7 enrichment teachers, occupational therapists of 3, and 6 speech and language therapists, and 41.8 special education teachers. We also have a secretary to the special ed supervisors, support staff of 55.3 instructional and educational assistants. Mrs. Clegg spoke about those when she was here with us in November. So once again, the budget includes salary increases for all the staff, additional work, and payment of health waivers that are contractually available. Fringe benefits, cost of benefits related above, again, the PSERS being the largest. And we go into a little bit more detail for the 300 object because of the MCIU cost plan is included in this particular object. Contracted services for teacher substitute for just special education. Contracted services for other educational contracted services, and then services for occupational therapy, physical therapy, and contracted vision and hearing services that we might need from time to time. Copier expense, as is in most functions, Other purchase services, traveling, printing, a majority of the expenses for tuition, again, for charter schools, which we discussed previously, and approved private school. That amount is a little bit difficult still for us to predict at this point in time for the current year. We aren't notified of our utilization of approved private schools until April, I believe it is. And it's not deducted until June 1st. So that's a late arriving number. So that's the differences, and that's the detail for 1200 function. Any questions in this area? $2,300 administrative functions. This covers kind of an interesting group and subgroups. 2,300 summary, administrative services, but we'll break it down. That's where we'll spend the time. 2310, excuse me, is the board services. There's not much expense under our board typically. We will go right into the information after we take a look at this great picture of the board. The detail, purchase professional services, fees for board members to attend conferences remained about the same. Liability insurance shows up underneath this particular function as prescribed by the Pennsylvania School Code. We have some software fees. Board doc, which we're looking at tonight, is in this area. No equipment this year. Sometimes there is. Fees and dues. In fact, one year we had costs related to upgrading the AV and computer equipment within this room, since primary reason or function of this area is for the board. Dues and fees, again, PSBA is the primary cost that we look at within the board function. 2330, taxes, tax collection services. The one that most everyone thinks about generally has to do with the real estate taxes. However, there are other amounts for collecting taxes. Salaries, well, we have 33,000 that's approved before the tax collector runs, so that is easy number to calculate. Social Security for the tax collector, that individual is not covered by PSERS. Then we have tax collector services for additional contracted help within the office. Again, that is covered by an agreement or resolution passed by the board before the tax collector runs. Delinquent real estate tax commission fees. Real estate transfer tax commission is 2% of the revenue received. So the cost of all of those particular taxes that are collected are reflected within 2330. EIT collection fee, which is 1.2% of the amount that we collect. So, and then there's also appraisal fees. I want to take just a pause here. We may have some changes coming to both the 18-19 estimate, because we may be making some additional before the end of the year appraisals as we are looking at some of these assessment appeals. And that's true also for next year. And bonding insurance for the tax collector, postage, mailing those bills, printing the bills, all the costs are contained within this particular function. 2340 and 2350, I'll just jump right to the detail because that is really just function of legal services and negotiations. Nothing budgeted for negotiations for next year. 2350 legal services, the different categories within legal services, retainer for the district solicitor, special education. We do quite a bit of breakdown within our legal fees, but you'll note the amount is about not much different than this year, $367,000. 2360. I have to wait till this loads the picture. It is Dr. Yanni with a student. I really just pulled up the board so I could have an excuse to look at this one. Anyway, the Office of the Superintendent, not a lot of variation within that. Get to the detail. Obviously, we have one superintendent, one administrative assistant, fringe benefit. The cost of benefits for the employees listed above. Sometimes when we have a change in personnel, not everyone is covered by our medical insurance. So you will notice some changes there. For next year's budget, you might ask yourself, well, why is it less than this year? We have people, or we have a former superintendent who's, as part of the retirement, still receiving benefits. And so that amount will need to be added and changed for 19 and 20. Purchase professional services, communication solutions group in case we need them. And also we've used BCIU comprehensive planning in the past. So that amount is included. Copier use. We're all trying to use copiers and paper less, but we're not completely away from that. Office supplies, books. No equipment included in there, and dues and fees. But compared to this year and 2 years ago, the amounts are down. 2370. Community relations is what the title of the function is. Oh. Uh-oh. What did I do, Miss Brooke? It's telling me my last browsing session closed unexpectedly. Can I restore it? I don't know what happened. Yeah. I should have had. Okay. We need to bring up the scoreboard too. Okay, thank you. Thanks. So looking at the detail in the 2370, we have the salary of the Facility and Community Affairs Manager, visual support and production specialist, the fringe benefits associated with those two positions. We have purchase professional services. One of the items that's noted seems to be a large jump in that, Jen. Thank you very much. So we had a communication specialist position was added during last year's budget and was budgeted, but we did not need that. So in case that's under salaries, if you'll notice, the budgeted amount was $293,000 for this year. The amount for next year is just the salaries for the two individuals. However, in case we needed to use a consultant, we currently have some money still budgeted down in the 300 as a consultant. And that's really it for this particular function. One of the largest functions under 2300, 2380, the detail, we'll jump right to that, has to do with our principals. We have 4 elementary principals, as you know, an assistant elementary principal currently, and there may be a change in this line. Middle school principal, assistant middle school principals, as well as 4th high school, in total 12. So secretaries also along 14 secretaries as far as the salaries within this particular part of the budget. Fringe benefits, again, just cost of PSERS, FICA, and dental, medical, and other really minor amounts for purchase professional fees, as well as travel or mileage. Supplies, again, reflected by the change in how we are budgeting, building budgets on a per pupil basis, and dues and fees. So a small increase, relatively speaking, for the total of 2380, although the total amount is $3.7 million. 2390, this was required by school code. They split out the cost, believe it or not, for graduation. So we have the detail on just the graduation. And the major thing, and really the only thing I want to point out on this particular, if I can push it up here, is that you'll note that the purchase services for next year have decreased to $2,800. Again, this comes from the high school building budget. 3,200 student activities. We, the athletic director, coaches, activity sponsors, game personnel, as well as the secretary, are the salaries that are included in this particular function. Fringe benefits, PSERS rate increase again, and that is included on all of the salary amounts related to the particular area. Athletic officials, athletic trainer services, because that is a contract versus an employee, is included in the next line under the 300, and very small increase in that particular line item. Purchase property services, a minor change, again, most likely coming from the high school or the middle school, because that's what student activities, most of them are. And insurance and travel reimbursement for competition. Please remember that we do have student insurance for our athletes that is board approved and is budgeted here. Supplies, that's where the source of the revenue or the money for the cost of all the footballs, helmets, and everything that is necessary for sports. I should also say basketballs. Anyway, that are required to maintain all of our program. We bought band uniforms last year, ordered and paid for, and this year $72,000. We won't be doing that for quite a while, so that's the major change within this function. Question?
I see at the 500 and 800 some jumps. Can you explain those? 10,000 for the insurance and the dues and fees. What's the
Most
reason
likely
behind those?
I'm not expecting that there would be that much of an increase for the insurance and the 500. A good question. Probably reimbursement for competitions and that.
Is it partly because our teams did so well? And they went to a lot of things?
And actually, that's a huge part of it. When they are successful at the end of the year, or at the end of the season, I should say, depending upon when the season is, there are additional costs incurred.
Does that include security at events?
Security, excellent question, but no, it does not. Security is really handled under the 2600s under operations. Again, that's the way school code. It's very logical that you would think that it might be charged here, but it isn't. And dues and fees, I don't remember. I'll have to look that up and get back to, or Ms. Baldasano will look. Sure. Any other questions? Oh. Thank you.
If we have no further comments or questions, we will open it up to community input. If you have anything you'd like to address the committee, please come to the microphone.
Brooke, can you move it down to community input, or is it not moving? Is it not? Okay.
Anita Brister, Fort Washington. First, just some, I don't know, regular business or something. Usually we get a handout for the budget, so all that expenditure thing, I totally can't see that, and it was not in here. So was that just a mistake tonight, or it's not in our packet, what you just did? We just went through. So I'm just saying for future reference, we used to get a handout.
It is available on the website under board docs.
Yeah, but that's why I come to meetings, when I do come to meetings, because I like the paper and I like to take notes. So, okay, so in other words, we're not going to get the budget handouts anymore? Is that just a change that has been made? Whatever. All right. I would like some kind of explanation as to why Dr. Wheeler is still getting benefits. That was mentioned. Curious on something with the health and the future negotiation. The part of the health presentation towards the end was about future negotiations considerations. Obviously, a contract was just negotiated, so you can't do anything until closer to the end of that contract. But is that something that a board would talk about in private, in executive session, or is that something a board could talk about or would talk about at a public meeting? I'm just curious about that because I don't think I've ever seen you talk about it I mean, some of those things are kind of general. So could they be discussed? Would they be better discussed at a public meeting, or do they have to be private? That's kind of what I'm asking. I'm not really sure. On the debt presentation, so they gave 3 options tonight. The highest number that was given tonight was the third scenario, which would be $74.9 million. This is for, the debt for the Sandy Run Middle School. What I still don't really have an answer to, and I did try to bring this up the other night, one thing is somebody did mention, I think Dr. Yanni, you did mention, we'll obviously know more when the bids come in. And I totally forget what you said as to when we would expect them to come in. So could you review that when after community input? But basically, I guess I want to know what are our options, if any, if the bids come in. We're already at about 75 million from what's been said at previous meetings. So if the bids come in under, I guess we're fine. If the bids come in higher, are there other options in the works or being discussed? Because obviously some things aren't in here. The second gym, the planetarium, I think there was something else. So I just want to know if those bids come in and it's worse than we think, are there any other options to put those things back in, or is that it? All right, that's it.
Jen Kuznets, Fort Washington. I just have one question. I'm just wondering, how much money do we have out right now at risk in current assessment appeals? I'm just wondering what that number is now. Thank you.
Hi, good evening. Joe Holmes, East Orland. I just have a question about the debt and why we're doing a negotiated offering versus a competitive bond offering, given the state of the municipal bond market, which, again, I missed the presentation by PFM, but the ratio of municipals to treasuries, the lowest since 2001. The spread between BQ and non-BQ municipal bonds is really non-existent given the new tax laws. So really, the benefit of issuing, 10 million and less in BQ bonds doesn't really exist. So my question is, why don't we issue the entire amount of $65 million now as a competitive offering rather than a negotiated deal. So, and obviously the benefits of issuing competitive bonds versus negotiated in terms of lower interest costs and lower expenses to Wall Street firms is quite common in our business. So thank you for that.
Are there any other community input? No? Seeing none, I guess we'll close community input. We have a couple questions to answer, if we can.
So one of the questions that was asked tonight was when the bids will come in. We will go out to bid in May. Bids will be opened, I believe, in July, sometime around either the end of the first or second week of July. Ms. Bray, could you speak about the last question that was asked about the bond?
Certainly. I'll start with the easy part first. We have to have a plan to spend down 85% within a certain period of time. And if we borrowed the whole $66 million, we might have an issue with the spend down. And that we've always, typically you divide it into multiple tranches. I understand your points about, and if we had a project that we weren't tearing things down and it wasn't over as many years as what it is, perhaps we would be able to borrow it in one less borrowing. As far as doing a competitive, we haven't done that recently. So I would suggest that we move forward one more time with a negotiated sale. We being PFM and myself, have been discussing going back to a competitive bid. We used to do a competitive bid in Upper Dublin, and then our bond rating decreased, and a negotiated sale helped us out a number of times when we had bonds that did not sell. So that's the reason to continue on with a competitive, with a negotiated. Lastly, as far as the BQ, my understanding is that will, because of advance refunding, which has been taken out by the Tax Reform Act, that is, we can't advance refund bonds, that the BQ lets us do an earlier call date, and that's the reason why we're continuing with that. But I'd be happy to have a conversation with you if you're interested.
Other questions? Ms. Bray, do we have any information on total current assessments?
At this point in time, we have several things that are currently
up in the air.
Well, not just up in the air, but are close to being perhaps settled. I would really prefer not to, as far as it being a legal issue, not to get into that amount. However, one of the particular pieces of information you do have to give when you're getting ready to do a bond issue in the official statement is a listing of the 10 largest taxpayers as well as appeals of those particular properties. So within 60 days or so, there will be some information available in order for us to be able to borrow the money.
And again, not to give the impression that we're hiding information, there are things that we need to speak with our solicitor about Monday night in executive session. But I would just say that the assessment appeals, some of them that are out right now, are significant and worrisome.
Oh, it was buzzing, sorry. Do we have any information regarding benefits for Dr. Wheeler? I think that was part of her negotiated contract. Am I correct on that?
To be totally transparent, it isn't Dr. Wheeler, it's Dr. Plattis.
Oh, thank you. Okay. All right. I think that we covered most of it. Go ahead.
Yeah, how many more years left on Dr. Plattis?
Once upon a time, there was, within the Act 93 provision and the contracted positions, there was the capability of having medical insurance for for a long period of time once you retired. And in fact, several administrators did retire at a kind of a younger age than they might have in order to use that particular provision. That went away in Act 93 a number of years ago. So it no longer exists. No one can take advantage of it. I would have to check because it isn't the same for everyone. Sometimes it depended upon the age when you were retired to age 65, and I believe for some of the individuals it was a certain number of years. So I would want to check on that.
Okay. Do we have any other comments or questions from the board? No? Okay. Seeing no more comments or questions, I would say we're at the end of the meeting. The next Finance Committee meeting is April 25th at 7 p.m. It will follow operations immediately thereafter. We are hereby adjourned.